Hello, thank you for that introduction. Excited to be here today. So today, the title of our talk here is what is equivalent in quotes, text alternatives for artistic and cultural heritage visual content. Now, the WCAG guidelines require visual content to have text alternatives that serve the quote equivalent purpose, end quote, of that visual content. And as historic and cultural institutions provide increasing access to their collections online, we grapple with providing consistent, high-quality text alternatives. While professional guidance is available on how to write quality text alternatives for web content, there is notably less available about writing alternative text for images of collection content. Today, we're going to speak about some research that we're hoping will help us better understand what descriptions are needed within the context of a cultural heritage information. I've used the word alt text and image description, and we're focusing on image description here. We're trying to be a bit technology agnostic, since image description needs to happen within EPUBs, documents, mobile apps, kiosk displays, web pages, the list goes on. And image description itself is a broad category. We'll get into this more, but it includes things like short descriptions, longer ones, and contextual information. And we think that image descriptions may need to convey information about a number of things: the image function, provenance, historic context, format, and the quality of the image itself, as well as all of that detailed information about the content that the image presents. To tackle this, we formed a group of professionals from across the library to discuss the successes, questions, and challenges that they've had in describing images. And in addition to the questions about the amount of information, what's too little and what's too much, and where to convey various types of information, additional things were asked, like how to address changing language over time, how and when to describe identity, things like gender, disability, racial identity. So in 2024, we are conducting a series of studies, some research using our varied collections to write supplemental guidance on text alternatives for cultural institutions. I'm Willa Armstrong, Accessibility Architect at the Library of Congress, and I'm here today with Liz Botner and Rochelle Bradley Montgomery to introduce this research and our findings from the first stage of these studies. Next slide. All right, this is a short and sweet one, our agenda. What we're going to talk about are research goals, non-text content, terminology, examples, guiding questions, study design, our sample questions, and then a good chunk of our results to date. We'll end, of course, with time for Q&A. Moving on to slide 3, research goals. So we have some practical goals for this research. We wanted to create a workflow and detailed instructions for writing high-quality image descriptions in cultural heritage institutions. We heard time and time again from our colleagues, it's not just detailed instructions and guidance, it's also that workflow to produce image description, including a review process for evaluating image descriptions. And we also, topically, the news word technology discussion of the day is exploring how this might develop into a framework that helps train AI to help create quality image descriptions or produce tools to support authors in writing quality image descriptions, and to determine when and if to use AI and when not to. All right, slide 4. So this study centers on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 1.1.1. The 1.1.1 success criteria, which is that all non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that serves, again, that phrase, equivalent purpose. So WCAG guidelines, there's concepts that are not always clearly verifiable. And this allows success criteria to be applicable in many situations, but it also sometimes might require a deeper understanding by experts and others in applying that requirement. The concept of equivalent purpose is one of those. When an image is a link or a control, it's much easier to identify its purpose than when the image is artistic or presents cultural heritage information that can be used in many ways. based on the viewer's intents and goals. So we started by trying to break down this complexity. In slide 5, we were talking about the parts of an image description. So image descriptions can be provided in several ways. And within the Library of Congress, we commonly use several methods to deliver image descriptions to our users. We might not use all of these at once, but I'll describe the 5 common methods. So the image, the actual visual content, is delivering information. Alternative text. In HTML, this maps to the alt attribute on the image element. Caption. So text that's adjacent to and programmatically connected to an image that typically includes factual information about the image. Text. So text that is the image is co-located with, that is text that appears on the same web page, app, screen, or document as the image. And this text typically references the image and provides additional information and details. And then lastly, link files. So this is a separate file that presents the information in a separate format. This could be a spreadsheet or other document, and it's provided on the same page, screen, or document as the image. But that's not the only way that image descriptions can be provided, and that's not always the only way we're providing image descriptions at the library. Additional methods include long descriptions, audio alternatives, interactions, tactile versions, and more. And we're also thinking about what might the future hold. How could we provide additional details and functionality in a consistent and expected manner? These aren't as common in usage, but they hold great potential that we're eager to explore. So I've talked a little bit about the parts of image description as we've defined them for our study. And I'm going to add in this next slide some of our study terminology. So we do have additional terminology that we're using in this study that we'll use throughout the rest of our talk. These include type of image. So the kinds of images that we're talking about. Visual information gets provided and used in different ways, and those include things like icons, collection forms, maps and floor plans, or graphs. Next up, we have the image use pattern. So how is the image and related information presented or used? Is it as a link or control? Is it to supplement text? Is it as a collection item in its own right? Is it to orient a user or a visitor? Is it to illustrate a trend, etc.? And then the last terminology I'll define today is our approach to description. So these are the ways in which image can be described. They could be things like a summary of the image, a description of the purpose, instruction on how to interact with an image if there is a level of interaction, or is the image decorative? And there's a lot more to say about the approach to description, which I'll hand off to Liz to speak more about.
Hello, everyone. This is Liz speaking. So I will now talk more about how an image can be described. There is an image on this slide of a button, and the button has a thin black outline and coral background. To the left is an image of a floppy disk, and to the right is text that says save in bold sans serif text. When we started our research, we started with 10 categories of how an image can be described. And after round 1, we are further refining the name conventions and categorizations. We now have an upwards of 20 categories of how to describe an image. For example, we created categories for emotive, clues, and mood. We expect to improve on this during future research. I will now talk about some of these categories and, when applicable, relate them to the image of the save button on this slide. The image summary, which relates to a short description of what the image represents. The example of our image on the slide, it is a floppy disk. Visual characteristics, which is a more detailed description of what the image represents. In this example, it is a black and silver floppy disk. Offensive content is another category. It does not necessarily apply to the image, I don't believe. On this slide, however, this includes terminology that has also changed over time. Instruction relates to what someone might do with an image if someone is focused on it. If in this case it is a control or a link, in this case, how would one activate the save button to save the file? The aesthetics of the image, visual characteristics of the image, such as color, realistic stylized icon in the case of this example, format, the type of an image, it's an icon, the save button is on the slide, emotive clues, details like facial expressions or body language, again, not represented in the image that we have up. Mood is another category, a feeling like playful, joyful, somber, etc. In image purpose, how is the image used? In this case, the image is used as a save to save something. The identity is another category. If there are people in the image, what is their identity? If they identify with things such as having a disability or other different types of identification. And decorative, is the image a decorative image or not? In this case, the image of the floppy disk is potentially redundant to the text, which is save, so it could be argued that that is a decorative image. Text content, is there text in the image? Directions, information on how to navigate a physical space, if the image is related to that. And then state, the state of the user interface element, something related to if an item is collapsed or selected. Context, information often found in captions, things like the photographer of the image or the date that it was created or taken. Another category is interactivity. If there is, if this applies, how it is used. This includes things like interactive graphs and charts. Another category is names and roles of people in the image. Maybe they are a nurse or some other person, and that is visually depicted in the image. Color is yet another category and how it is used in the image, along with scale and position, and the size of objects in the photo in general or in relation to one another. And then the position of objects in their photo. Are they small objects, or do they take up a lot of real estate in the photo? Also, physical quality of the photo. Are there tears in the photo? Is it folded? Things like that. Another category is visual quality. Is the photo blurry or dark, or is it easy to see? So those are some categories. Next slide, please. Slide number 8. Now we have examples of images that I will talk through related to what we have been previously mentioning. This slide contains another image, and this image is from a blog post about classroom interiors. It also includes a text caption, and the text of the image does have alt text, and it is an excerpt of a blog as well that this was taken from. The alt text in the image reads black and white photograph of students studying in a classroom. The text caption on the side reads Charlotte Courthouse, Virginia, Central High School, classroom, photo by Philip Bond, 1943 June. And it also gives the identification URL of the photo. This slide also includes text from the blog that references the image. This text reads, quote, "Not surprisingly, patriotic pictures and messages abound in this wartime classroom photographed in 1943 in Charlotte Courthouse, Virginia. A portrait of a president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, has a central spot on the wall. The message at the left of the portrait seems a bit incongruous in a room inhabited only by young women, quote, and every boy can help win this war by collecting scrap rubber and metal, end quote." Let's see. And then also that the because this was because a description of the image in the blog mentioned that there were that there was information about the students. There was no that was not included in the alt text. Let's see. And so related to this image of the students in the classroom, the image summary might be that this is an image of students studying in a classroom. The visual characteristics could be something like 5 students sitting at a desk reading books in front of a blackboard covered in posters. The image aesthetics format it is a photograph. The emotive clues: the students are absorbed in reading books. The mood might be studious. And then related to decorative, is this image based on decorative? Is this image decorative based on the blog text and caption? And then the context is the date, location, photographer. And there are no names mentioned. Let's see. The color of the photo is black and white, a black and white photograph. Scale and position: 5 students sitting at desks. The blackboard is large and covers most of the wall. Physical quality of the image: there is a number 33437 handwritten on the side of the photo. The visual quality of the photo is high resolution with a thick border. And then that is, so that's a little bit about that image. Next slide, please, slide number 9. Let's see. And this is an example of an image from the collection, from the free to use collection at the library. And then, so this slide also has an image on it with a text caption, and the text of the image does have alt text. This image is of Helen Keller with links to the free to use collection of disability related images, and it is also an image within the collection. The image is a black and white print photograph of an older Helen Keller in a dress suit and pill hat. The alt text reads disability related images or Helen Keller in a dress suit with pill cap around age 70. She is standing with her arm around a young boy and helping him balance while he sits on a railing. Both are smiling. And then the image, and again, we're going down the categories of type of related to this image. The caption: Helen Keller advocated for disability rights through lectures and books and was herself deafblind, shown here in 1956. There are 2 images. These 2 images allowed us to start to explore differences in what participants, our research participants, wanted to know when presented with images of known and unknown people. And just to back up the previous image with the classroom, that was an example of an image of unknown people. I did not mention that before. I apologize. In particular, these images let us explore the gender and racial identity. The library uses the AP style guide for terminology, but we wanted to validate and expand on this guidance. We heard mixed information from participants. Some would prefer to be told information to help them make judgments such as, quote, dark or light skin, unquote, or, quote, human wearing a dress, end quote, or, quote, appears to be female, end quote. Others felt that being ambiguous on racial and gender identity would be offensive. Our initial conclusion is to use explicit racial and gender identity when these are known about people in the images, but to provide visual information like, quote, figure wearing a dress, end quote, or use, quote, appears to be African American, end quote, when the author or image provider is unsure about these characteristics. We need to gather a lot more information about this topic, and we will do that in our further research. This includes needing to better understand not just the how, but also the when around authors adding this information. Next slide, slide number 10, please. I will now talk about some guiding questions. And so what makes for a good quality image description in various situations? What kinds of information should be in the description? What level of detail should be used in the description? What order should the content be described in? How should the content be presented? What mechanism should it be presented in? How and when should identity be described? How should offensive content be handled or not handled? So those are just some questions. Slide number 11, please. The slide relates to study design. In stage 1, this is a moderated survey. Participants select and order all possible descriptive elements of an image. We walked through participants through survey and reference questions and we will further define them for stage number 2. And stage number 2 is an unmoderated survey. And then participants will select information and in terms of how they also prefer that the information to be ordered. This relates to collection items. And participants will select the level of detail they prefer in a description. Participants will also select if they prefer how they prefer handling sensitive content. Participants will order the descriptive elements. Stage number 3 is focus groups of our research. We will discuss findings and ways that alt text can be presented to make it easier to interact with the images. We have completed our first stage of the research. We conducted 6 in-depth interviews about 17 distinct images. Of those participants, 4 identified as blind, 1 identified as blind with light perception, and 1 participant identified as having low vision. 2 participants had additional ambulatory disabilities, and 1 participant had an additional cognitive disability. All participants used assistive technology to access image descriptions in daily activities. 5 participants used screen readers. 1 participant used a magnifier, and 3 participants used braille displays. And 1 participant explicitly mentioned using optical character recognition software. For each scenario in our research, we asked participants to provide their first impressions about what information would be desired in terms of them wanting to know certain things about an image that we were talking about. We then went through prepared options that shaped the different ways that the images could be described, and asked if the participants would want the information or not, and if they did want the information, whether they would want it in several category options. The first of these being alternative text, which is information read in place of the image. Next, there is secondary text, or the long description, that is associated with the image, but read after the alternative text or when requested. The third category is page text, so adjacent text, not associated directly with the image, having the information in a separate resource that is linked to the primary resource, such as an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document. So those are some of the categories. And then slide number 12, please. This is an example question from stage number 1. This slide has an image of a floor plan with the following text, which is pulled from our round 1 research script. You are preparing to visit the library, and you have found a page with floor plans of the Great Hall. The floor plans are a black and white graphic and include icons for features like stairs and restrooms. Locations of interest, such as the Gutenberg Bible, are labeled in text. We then prompted the participants to tell us what after reading that description they would like to have described in that scenario. After that conversation, we then asked about individual characteristics or pieces of that information. Again, I am reading the text that is also on the text that is also on the slide. So some of the options were whether they wanted to know that it was a great hall, a floor plan. Then the Great Hall has 2 staircases to the 2nd floor, 1 to the north and 1 to the south. The staircases separate the Great Hall north, which is the family room, and the Great Hall south, which is the lyric poetry room, from the Great Hall. There are 3 arches leading to the back of the Great Hall, and the closed entrance to the main reading room. The directions to the visitor locations of interest on the 1st floor assume that you are in the Great Hall, facing east towards the closed entrance to the main reading room. Wheelchair accessible restrooms are located on the ground floor, If you require a wheelchair accessible restroom, please refer to the ground floor plan. The Gutenberg Bible is also located after the arches in the Great Hall on the first floor, in the west side of the building, in a freestanding squared display case. And then directions to the Great Hall, step 1, while facing east towards the closed entrance to the main reading room, proceed forward until you reach the opening under the center arch. And this does go on, but for time, I will just refer you to read our slides. So all of the participants, when presented with this question, mentioned wanting to know about directions or relationships between items, such as a part of the image description for the floor plans. And there's a quote here from a participant. I'd want to know, quote, I'd want to know where things are in relation to each other, because I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, someone can figure out how to go from here to there within the Great Hall visually. End quote. I will now turn it over to Rochelle.
Thank you. So before I jump into more detailed results that we've gotten so far, I want to put some caveats to our findings. So this was an initial qualitative study. It's the beginning of our research to really help us prepare for a larger set of surveys that will be coming out this spring. Our sample size was small, 6 people, but we went really, really deep with those participants. And because we wanted to get that kind of depth and those details and to really test our assumptions as accessibility professionals, we structured this research as conversations. So as one participant pointed out to us, there is a cognitive difference for participants in talking to someone, the way we structured this, and in listening to a screen reader. And we just want to acknowledge that really right up front. We also noticed a tendency in all of our participants that once they made the commitment to creating a second place for additional details, so going beyond just the strict alternative text, they were a lot more likely to keep adding in details. And it's something we just want to account for in future research design and to be aware of. So with those qualifications in mind, what did we learn? So the first thing we did is we managed to confirm what I think is standard accessibility kind of best practice, which is when you have a link or you have a control, the most important thing for your alternative text is purpose and context. And we have an image here of Helen Keller from the library's free to use and reuse image collection. We do have this situation, as Liz went over, where it's both an image when you get to the collection, but it is also the link you click on to go to the collection. And in that situation, people want purpose. And we have this fabulous quote, Helen Keller, even though she's a great lady, she's not telling us what the link purpose is. What people wanted here was the free to use and reuse disability collection. And that was pretty consistent across participants. And things like save, those kinds of controls, it's what you would expect based on our best practice. Now, in addition to purpose, participants also wanted context. So we tested an image on an expandable accordion, and participants wanted the state of the accordion. So, quote, I would want to hear the state. If I hear the other one or both, expanded, activate to collapse, I think it gets confusing. And so it was really consistent across our participants. If you have an accordion, just give the state, not further instructions beyond that. Those just get confusing. In addition, some things like the email icon that we tested that launched an email, participants wanted a little more information than just email. They wanted who was being emailed. So email the Library of Congress, and that was preferred. And lastly, just another example within a carousel of sheet music, Several participants mentioned wanting the count. So 1 in 4 or 1 in whatever the number of sheets there were. And one participant also pointed out that he'd want to know it was a sheet. So should it say sheet 1 instead of image 1? So adding in a little more context about the image is part of giving the overall carousel context. So those were good guidance, not surprised, but we did want to make sure we were confirming what we already supposed. Moving on to the next slide, so slide 15, and I'm going to pause here and say ZQ has very kindly offered to let us update our slides. We've been working on this pretty consistently, and so had more data that we wanted to bring to the conference, but we will have to send updated slides for you all to download, and I've moved into those updates. So when we moved into collection images, we found something very different than when we were dealing with images that were controls or were links. And as soon as we got to those complex images, participants still wanted brevity in the alt text and the alternative text, but they wanted a really unexpected level of detail when you moved outside of the alternative text. And so again, they wanted to limit how much was initially said, but they wanted access to a lot more information. And I'm just going to read a couple quotes about the alt text. One is just, we started getting into those details, and one person just said, quote, "I think that's just too much to swallow," or "The only thing I really want in the alt text is Helen Keller," going back to that one example. Another one said, quote, "All of that would just have to be secondary. There's far too much. And really, I don't even, if you parse it out, I can't see that being in any alt text personally." But kind of then when we moved outside of that and we were exploring, details, there was this really strong desire for the details. And so just to kind of dive into that here, some of the detail types in that categorization Willow went over were split. So some had about half of the people wanted the physical quality. So 53% might want information about the quality of the item in the image. And about 58% wanted to know about color and information about color. But then other areas were really notably, and for us, surprisingly more popular. 92% wanted a generic summary, especially when we looked at examples of humor or other complicated images. 90% wanted emotive clues, and I will talk a little bit more about that. We originally started thinking about emotion and mood together, but it became very clear as we went into these conversations that they were different. 88% wanted context. 91% wanted text content. And in fact, often people wanted all of the text content. I'll talk about that as well. But the lowest category, and thinking about all those categories we talked about, the lowest category was visual quality, and the lowest category was only 40%. So half of our participants, still approximately half, wanted visual quality. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking of these as participants, but we actually had around 1,000 different pieces of data points. And this is of those data points across participants, 40% of 7% of those were desired. Clarify my percentages there. So the details, kind of going beyond the image purpose, the details really varied, like what people wanted. So here are some example quotes of some of the kinds of information people wanted and when it changed. So one of the things that seemed to shift when people wanted context or additional image information was the context around the image. So one person said, "I wouldn't normally care, but I'm thinking that since it's a blog about classrooms, let's go ahead and add that in." So if they just encountered the image in one place, they wouldn't have wanted the information, but because it's in this particular blog, this particular context, they wanted more information on that area. Another one was personal preference. So people just had different preferences. And a lot of our participants acknowledged that. So one said, quote, "I know people who would want all of that information that I just discarded." And so just acknowledging that space and that cause for differences. Another was the interest level of the detail, really the coolness factor of the information. And so we, for example, went through an image of objects from Abraham Lincoln's pockets, and one of them is a $5 Confederate bill. And people found that interesting. People found colors interesting in some cases, but not in others. And so a quote here is, normally that information would not be of interest to me, but it's interesting. So in this case, I would probably go ahead and put it in. Another factor that seemed to change whether people wanted certain types of information was the disability. And this is something we need to do a lot more in-depth exploration of. But for our participant who was low vision, they stated that would be beneficial because I see something like that, but it helps me to describe it. And so the effect of disability on how people use and interpret and handle image descriptions is one that we should think about, because it's too much to oversimplify how image descriptions are used to just screen readers. There's a lot of different use cases for that. And then the last one was the task. And so this is one of the challenges in cultural heritage institutions and collections, is that different people use the content for different things. And so one participant noted, quote, for researchers, that's like critical, but I'm not one. So I don't think so. They didn't want that information because they weren't a researcher. Participants also expressed a desire for a consistently implemented and easy to use secondary location for image descriptions. And it was really for a couple reasons. First of all, they wanted it because of the volume of information they wanted, or because they wanted additional functionality in that content. So one person said, quote, I would like a lot of descriptions on the same page, but with alt text, you're only allowed so much text. If it's on the same page, you'd be able to add a lot more description to the picture. And the more you describe, it would give someone with low vision or blind the same experience as someone who has sight. Having it on the same page would give the reader the ability to encounter the image just as someone sighted. But then we also had this concept of additional functionality that could be provided, like bulleted lists or a table format that would allow navigation, or an audio file, or directions that would be easier to navigate in a structured format. So those were the two driving reasons people really wanted to have it. But they also consistently commented on how they would like it to be consistent and easy to use. So they said, yes, there's a lot of information. This is a quote, but I don't necessarily want to go and grab it from another document. I don't want to have to hit a hotkey, though if it was standardized, I'd probably be okay with a hotkey as long as I know. And if it was more complicated, they would have rather had it on as a description on the page. So we did hear this request for or interest in having something beyond alternative text that was easy and consistently implemented across platforms. When we did a breakdown of how people wanted to access different additional details beyond that alternative text, we saw that 33% of people wanted the content that they heard in the alt. 37 wanted it in some kind of secondary form, the closest of which we have right now is the long description. 28% of people wanted it on the page, and only 2% of people wanted things in a separate resource. And there's this, yep, I read the quote, sorry. Let's see. So from there, we wanted to just talk about some additional guidance that we kind of pulled out of what we heard from this research. And again, all the qualifications that I mentioned at the beginning should be taken into account there. So the first one is that when writing alternative text for cultural heritage content, we think you should focus on facts and avoid interpretation. So participants genuinely wanted to draw their own conclusions. Focus on text. People wanted the text, and sometimes it was a lot of text in an image. We tested a map of Waikiki, and it had a ton of text on it, but people wanted it. And we heard quotes that were along the lines of, if it's text, pull it out, or it's text, so put it in the alternative tag. So there is that real desire to have the text. Focus on people. The fact that participants wanted information about people more than they wanted information about buildings, about locations, about context outside of the individual. So we got deeper and deeper into those details when they were information about an individual. And so again, just thinking about prioritizing what you pull out of images, that seems to be an area to really focus on. Some other ideas that came out was to consider what stands out to sighted individuals. And so there was this concept several people brought up of, oh, well, if it stands out to somebody who's looking at it, I want to hear about it. And similarly, consider what's interesting. So again, going back to that Confederate $5 bill, it's interesting. Think about what in the image would spark interest or delight and kind of bring that out as well in the alternative text or the image description details. So I think we kind of want to just touch on our next steps, because where are we? This is the initial research. We want to create surveys that present a more realistic experience for participants to confirm and expand on these findings. So these are initial. We want to build on those and really validate them. We'd also like to explore easier ways to use or to provide those additional visual details. We'd like to write a framework for authors, particularly at the Library of Congress and other cultural heritage institutions, to use when they're writing image descriptions, particularly for cultural, artistic, or historic images. We also believe there is an opportunity here for additional assistive technology with support from AI. The visual details that assistive technology users would benefit from really seem to vary based on image context, personal preference, interest in a detail, their disability, or the user's task. And it's just, I want to acknowledge, it's not possible for authors to create that level of detail to support all of those needs. But it may be possible to build out a framework that could be used to train AI to analyze the images and maybe answer queries. So a simple example of that right now would be that you could ask assistive technology to run optical character recognition and pull all the text out. That seemed to be something participants wanted, and it's well within technology capabilities right now. The fact that our participants really wanted visual facts and not summaries or conclusions, they wanted to draw their own conclusions, makes that idea of a query and response system much more likely to fit with those user needs. And while none of these conclusions are final, we look forward to exploring other areas. And with that, I will turn it over to questions.
We've got time really for one quick question on this, and really the top voted question is, where can the participants listening to today's presentation, where can they really help follow your research and get those cases for the research? Because in chat, we've had a lot of people, ask questions and say this would help them in what they're trying to perform, et cetera. I know you've got more stages ahead, but where should someone go that wants to follow along with what the team is doing and some of the findings that you're finding as you go along?
Let's see if anyone else wants to answer that. Briefly, we will be putting out on social media our next stage. We'll get the updated slides to DQ to update here. And then our next stage will very much be putting out those surveys. And so keeping an eye out for those. We don't have a dedicated page yet to follow this, but we are looking into whether we can create one.
Awesome. Awesome. So we've got that. Now, the other questions we haven't been able to get to, but one thing I said it in the chat, I mentioned to the speakers beforehand, we're going to give them a snapshot of all the questions and all the chat that went on. Definitely have that Discord server that we can continue the conversation about this. I know the team is going to be very interesting in the chat. There was a lot of conversation about alt text and some of the things that the team talked about, but I know this is a conversation that a lot of people are interested on and that we want to continue. From myself and the presenters, we want to thank you for your time and energy. We want to thank you for attending this talk. It was great learning about how people view alt text and what they're looking for in a situation, especially when it's something tied to heritage. So I want to really thank our presenters and thank for everybody who attended. Hopefully you'll have a great rest of AXCON and a great rest of the day. Otherwise, we wish you well. Thanks.